Hello everyone and welcome to the third part of my Divide et Impera head-to-head campaign. Now for those who don't know, this series is a recap of streams that are played out by myself as the Mauryan Empire and JackieFish as Macedon, and we stream this campaign every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 PM GMT if you want to check it out. Now if you haven't already, please do check out the first and the second part, as this is a cinematic story that builds with each passing week. If you like that and you want to see more, please do leave a like and comment nice things. See you on the other side. The recently secured town of Furada had been devastated and plundered several times. In just the past 10 years alone, the territory had exchanged hands 4 times, and the population there were now in disarray. However, with the copper mines now up and running for the Mauryans, trade income boomed with the Arabian empires. Sharudat, the Mauryans' leading general, and Jagabandu, the Mauryan Shah, fresh off their victories in the province of Makkah, pursued and defeated yet another Bactrian army to the north, before moving west to track down a Saka Rauka army laying waste to the fringes of their newly conquered territory. However, as they moved northwest, a small contingent of Bactrians no stronger than 500 or so men slipped past the army and made contact with Furada. They promised the devastated town independence and gold, liberating them from empire rule, installing a puppet government. While Sharudat crossed the harsh desert terrain, this newly found city-state marched their freshly raised mercenary army up behind them and launched a surprise attack. Their ill-equipped army dealt a stinging blow, but were dealt with swiftly, and Sharudat crossed back to recapture Furada yet again. Only this time, entering the city, they were met with a newly raised and well-equipped Bactrian force. A siege ensued and a battle followed in which Sharudat and Jagabandu, extremely low on numbers and supplies, made a valiant last stand to defend Furada, but were ultimately defeated and killed. After this colossal military setback, Makkah was undefended yet again, and the copper trade deals signed with Arabia were now defunct. The ally the Mauryans formed, Sadrakarta to the north, were defeated by Parthia, but their land was quickly taken by Atropat Khan, who, while at war with Parthia, did not seek to invade further east, but only to secure their own provinces. Things were not looking good for the Mauryans. They were quickly running out of allies, money, and manpower. Bindusara, the original Shah who spearheaded the conquest of the west, had 4 children, 2 of which had now come of age. Madhav, who was a 17-year-old and had excelled at administration, and the more ambitious Jobeer, a mere 15-year-old boy who, hearing about the death of his uncle, had now assumed his place as the family leader ahead of his older brother. Jobeer was determined to avenge his father, who died at the hands of the Bactrians, and began raising an army in his name. He was joined by a secondary general, Shanya, who began raising an army in the western province of Carmania. After a year of raising new forces, the two linked up and began an aggressive invasion into Furada territory, raiding and devastating the region as they went. The governor of Carmania, also named Jobeer, who had helped with the invasions before, also sent military aid to the two commanders, and together they outmaneuvered and cut down several Bactrian armies, using overwhelming numbers, hit-and-run tactics, and also a feigned retreat that led to an ambush just outside of Furada. With the surrounding armies dealt with, a final Bactrian army defending Furada sallied out to meet the battered Mauryans in the field. Shanya reasoned with Jobeer to turn back, regain strength and launch a stronger attack, but Jobeer felt it was imperative to regain the copper mines and push the Bactrian towns as fast as possible, not giving the Bactrians a chance to recover. Sooner or later, Parthia could be bearing down on them again, so overwhelming aggression and speed was key while the Parthians were out of sight. It was also reasoned that fighting their defensive pike army outside of the town would be far more manageable than fighting the Bactrians inside of a town. After a foggy and messy engagement, the Mauryans prevailed and marched into an undefended Furada. It had taken 4 years since Jobeer first began raising the fresh armies to do it, but the Bactrians had finally been dealt a severe blow that they would not recover quickly from. Now there was a logistical problem in recruiting fresh troops from the devastated region, but pushing Artacawana was also imperative to hold as a walled bastion against further invasion. During this time in the west, Macedon was fulfilling its ambitions in Hellas, waging war on both Knossos and Athens, where the battles largely took place at sea. The Macedonian fleet under the command of Aristocles had an easy time of catching and sinking advancing Cretan armies trying to reach the Peloponnese. However, when the Athenian fleet caught wind of the whereabouts of this navy, they attempted to engage it to free up the armies of Knossos to allow for a southern invasion, while they took the brunt of the force and defended their capital. Clisthenes, the Athenian naval commander and decorated war hero, engaged the Macedonian navy near Rhodes in what was to be one of the most famous naval battles of the era. The Macedonian navy had very slight less numbers, but hard-hitting ships with reinforced hulls and a focus on melee troops, while the Athenian navy relied on its skirmish ability and speed. Unfortunately, the weather turned in the engagement, making it difficult for the Athenians to use fire to burn enemy ships at range, instead relying on hit-and-run tactics. The Athenians got the upper hand on the flanks, managing to draw out some of the enemy ships away from the central conflict, peppering them with arrows and javelins and denying them their ramming capabilities, while the Macedonians punched a hole straight through the center, catching and bogging down some of the lighter ships and boarding them, where they were easily cut down in hand-to-hand combat. Aristocles had his ships swarmed with smaller vessels and was killed, which sent panic in the Macedonian fleet, but they held on and performed a few key rams that slowly started turning the numbers against the Athenians. Eventually, the Athenians' smaller numbers simply didn't have the ammo required to use for skirmish tactics as a viable option. They began getting cut down and rammed as they tried to flee, suffering devastating casualties. The battle was over and the Macedonians had suffered a Pyrrhic victory. Clisthenes had escaped, but later committed suicide before the Macedonians could get to him, scuttling his own ship in the process. With no impediment at sea, the Aegean was all Macedon's. It didn't take long before the Athenian smaller fortified army was surrounded near Athens and cut down by the Macedonian general Demetrius, although with a valiant last stand from the Athenians, and a subsequent city siege then followed, which Macedon made short work of. It's unclear exactly when Knossos fell, but shortly around the same time the city fell to Macedonian rule after its invasion forces had been wiped out. Hellas was now completely under the control of Macedon. Back in the east, Jobeer was now on the warpath. After just 6 months, he'd raised new forces to strike at Artachoana, the capital of the Horiva province, an incredibly daring move as the city had a large 3,000-man garrison force, and reports of Parthian armies on the borders increased the risk of a follow-up attack. However, the city fell when pushed with overwhelming numbers, and the Parthians fielding largely mounted armies retreated back north of Mav, as a city assault would not have been a good idea. With Artachoana established as a new stronghold frontier for the Mauryans, with fresh troops and new military training grounds, Jobeer wasted no time in ordering a defensive army raised there, while he took his army through the mountain pass to the east and pushed straight to the capital of Bactra. The city was largely undefended and was swiftly captured before Jobeer pushed further east to Ikratidea to seize the gold mines there. It was clear that the Bactrians' infrastructure had completely collapsed, and with its military hubs offline, there was little resistance coming Jobeer's way, though Parthia remained a constant threat at Marv that could not be left alone for too long. About 2 years passed while the Mauryan economy underwent radical changes. Now with the influx of gold, copper, and new sources of spice, distant empires were willing to trade again, and new armies could be raised. Several rebellions were quickly stamped out across the territories of Macha, Horiva, and Bactria, and no battles had taken place apart from small skirmishes between scouting parties. The next objective was the town of Marv. Important for its silver mine and also its position in the province of Horiva, it would allow Mauryan culture to flourish and take hold more swiftly. The Parthians had been keenly defending Marv with several armies while the Mauryans raided its extremities to provoke the Parthians into separating their forces. Jobeer's older brother Madhav, the governor and defender of Artachoana over the past few years, was ordered to now go on the offensive west to Sucia in order to distract the armies away from Marv. With little resistance, the town was captured and liberated so that the Mauryans could form a buffer ally between themselves and Atropatkan. Now Madhav pushed north to Marv, looking to surround the city and link up with his brother. Outnumbered and boxed in, the Parthians began to retreat back to Nisa, allowing Jobeer to take Marv uncontested. The Parthians still had around 8,000 experienced cavalrymen at this point, and were a serious force to be dealt with that Jobeer would much rather not fight. However, even with just one final stronghold left, the Parthians still refused terms of peace and offers of protection. Jobeer, Madhav and Shania together made a push of about 15,000 troops into Parthia's final territory of Nisa, looking for a definitive end to this conflict. However, Parthia continued to flee, evading the armies and capturing Sucia for themselves, while Jobeer defeated the remaining Parthians and liberated Nisa. Jobeer's attention was then pulled back east to a rebellion festering back at Bactra, so he gave command to his brother Madhav to deal with the remaining Parthian armies, while another army under the command of Madhav came up from the south to help. Eventually, Madhav and Shania surrounded Sucia with about 8,200 men. The Parthians were now locked down inside the settlement with around 4,600 men. Now, this meant that about 3,000 Parthians had gone unaccounted for somewhere west. Because of this, Madhav and Shania did not need to wait for Madhav to come up from the south, and the battle began in the winter of 243 BC under the command of Madhav. The armies linked up together on the northeastern side of the town and attempted to march southeast around the natural cliff barrier of the settlement. However, as Madhav's army pushed closer to the town, he found himself constantly harassed from behind by Parthian cavalry, poking and prodding at units that fell behind the main army. As Madhav's army got closer to the opening of the settlement, an equally large 2nd Cavalry force pressed him from the front. Madhav was now totally surrounded on both sides, with units being picked off and disorganization of the army causing his vulnerable archer corps to not prepare their lines to counter-fire correctly. His only hope in this desperate situation was to get into the town with as many units as possible and create just one front. But the Parthians made that extremely difficult, exploiting and creating different openings for cavalry charges, all the while their horse archers formed Cantabrian circles and fired into the crowds of troops. The lightly equipped Indian spear units were no match for hard cataphract charges from veteran cavalry, as lines would get smashed, exposing the soft core of archers behind. The inferior Mauryan cavalry at the back was quickly targeted and almost completely wiped out, leaving the army extremely immobile and unresponsive. Shania, the second in command, was killed, with Madhav badly injured. The battle was turning into a colossal disaster, and while the Parthians were losing pockets of cavalry, it paled in comparison to the losses of the Mauryans. As the Mauryans whittled down in numbers though, their defensive capabilities did increase. Their new Indo-Hellenic hoplites could withstand most of these charges, and they stayed much more compact, allowing their archers to fire better on intruding cavalry. Soon the Parthian cavalry began to get cut down in greater numbers, though were still doing incredible damage as they exhausted the remains of their ammunition. A small Mauryan contingent broke off and made an attempt at breaching the garrison infantry defenses, but was heavily repelled with missiles from inside the town. The 1,000 or so Indo-Greco peltasts, whom had barely fired their shots, moved up to the town and began slamming their javelins into the town to make a breach, and returning to fire on cavalry at their backs. During this chaos and confusion, Madhav fled the battlefield and escaped, while the soldiers were left on their own to press on or flee the battlefield with him. Without a general to lead them, and after several charges from remaining Parthian cavalry, most of the Mauryan missiles broke and fled the battlefield, while a small contingent pressed onward, routing the remaining cavalry in hand-to-hand combat and attempting to breach the defenses of the settlement. About 1,400 men remained out of the 8,000 committed to the fight, and the day was drawing to a close fast. The Indo-Hellenic hoplites led the offensive in street-to-street fighting, while a handful of 40 or so Agama cavalry looked for an opening to push in. 500 peltasts with no ammo pressed against the light spear militia of the Parthians in repeat countercharges, while 200 Persian archers conserved what little ammo they had left, only firing it into the most densely packed pockets of enemies. Once that ammo was then spent, even the badly equipped archers took to the streets to add weight to the fight. Eventually, the hoplites had carved through a significant portion of the east entrance and lifted their hoplite formation, rushing to the rear of the enemy garrison commander who was holding off the cavalry and the peltasts. This blow from behind destroyed morale, and the panic of the breach spread to all of the enemy units. the Agama cavalry pushed and leapt over men to get to the back lines and get embroiled in the combat at the rear, with the remaining Parthian spear unit quickly returning to the centre to make a last stand. It didn't last long before one more charge broke their spirit and the day was won. The Mauryan losses here totaled 4,300 men, wiping out half of their force. When the news of this reached Jobeer, he was furious, and Madhab was disgraced as a commander who fled the battlefield. Though he was primarily a governor, such a cowardly act was not to be excused. Sucia was then re-established as a liberated empire, and Parthia was left without a city to call home. Okay, so that's going to be it for the video. Remember, this is about 14 hours of streams condensed down into about a 15-minute video or so. We get a lot of people that say they really like these videos, but unfortunately they haven't been doing too crazy for numbers, so I haven't prioritized them as high. If we get more likes, more shares, or if we get a few patrons or something like that, then I'll definitely dedicate more time to doing them. I love making these videos, they're a lot of fun. So remember to hit that like, hit that share, leave a comment, share it with people that you think might be interested, and we'll do more. And of course, we stream this campaign every Tuesday and Thursday over on twitch.tv/republicaplay at 2 p.m. GMT. That's London time for those who are interested. Again, thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you in the next one.